Today, we're going to spend the balance of our time with a Mishnah. And I don't even think we'll finish the Mishnah. And the Mishnah you'll find on the top of Daf Lamed Aleph Amid Beis. Now, in order to appreciate this Mishnah, we have to review some of the basics that we know about the avoda of the Kohen Gadol. And number one, the story of the Kohen Gadol that leads up to the beginning of the avoda that we're going to learn about today is that the Kohen Gadol, after spending a week in the Lishkas Farhedrin during the week of Prisha, now they bring him to a Lishka, which is called the base of Tinas. And that's for the final conclusion of the Prisha of the Kohen Gadol. So for 7 days before Yom Kippur, the Prisha was in the Lishkas Farhedrin. That's the first Mishnah in Masechet Yoma. And then he would sleep in the Lishkas Farhedrin for all those nights. On the night of Yom Kippur, after the 7-day period of quarantine ends, then he found himself in the Lishkas base of Tinus. And now they take the Kohen Gadol from the Lishkas base of Tinas and they bring him to the base of Tvila for Tvila, for mikvah. Now, where is this base of Tvila? This is called the Shara Mayim. You remember we had a whole discussion about the Shara Mayim. The Shara Mayim is located right next door, contiguous to the base of Tinas. And now he does Tvila. And that's what our Mishnah is going to begin with, the Tvila in the Shara Mayim, which is contiguous to the base of Tinas. Now, we may recall that before he goes down to the mikveh, they took a sadin, a curtain that was made of linen, and it's called butz. Butz is linen, and they covered over the Kohen Gadol so that no one could see him when he went down to the mikveh. That's called tznius. Also, keep in mind the Kohen Gadol has to make sure that they have awe and kavod for the Kohen Gadol. That's part of his responsibility. He's not allowed to act in a demeaning way. So therefore, we need this protection, this curtain. And now we're up to the first tvila of 5 tvilos that are going to take place during the course of the Avodas Yom Kippur. The first tvila is the tvila of the Tamid Shel Shachar. The Kohen Gadol, and this is going to occupy us for today, is involved in the Tamid Shel Shachar. And when he does the Seder Avot of the Korban Tamid Shel Shachar, he begins with a tvila. That's the beginning of his avoda of Yom Kippurim, the Tamid Shel Shachar. Now, before the Kohen goes down, Kohen Gadol goes down to the mikveh, and they've already set up the sadin shel butz. He has to check his body and make sure there are no chatzitzos. And this is derived from the pasuk in Achrimos. It says, "V'rachatz b'mayim es bisaro." B'mayim is interpreted as direct contact between his body and the water of the mikveh. Shelo yeh davar chotzeis beino levein hamayim. And therefore, the first thing he has to do before he goes down into the water is to bodek gufo mi chatzitzos, to check out his body, make sure there's nothing that could be a chatzitz. Because of the pasuk b'mayim. Now, you may know that there are 2 versions of the Avoda Musaf service of Yom Kippur. One is called Ata Konanta, the other is called sorry. Just had one of those moments. Okay, sorry, I apologize for that. Anyway, let's talk a minute about Ata Konanta, which is not our minhag, but you'll see it in the back of the Machzorim. And there, the liturgist, right, the Python, when he describes, oh, so wait a minute, I said Ata Konanta, yeah, and the other one is called Amitz Koach. If I'm not mistaken, our minhag is to recite Amitz Koach and Ata Konanta is in the back. So check me out on that if you have a machzor. Anyway, in the Amitz Koach, he says, Olav Parshu Masach Butz Lahatznia. Lahatznia means for tznius. And that's in the Amitz Koach. The Ata Konanta adds another piece. Parshalo Sadin Shel Butz. Bigia Eis Shchitas Keves Hatomit. Lasos Mechitza Beino Vein Ha'am. And then it says Osa Mitzvah, meaning then he goes down to be Tovel, be Ema Ubiyira. And then, again, this is in the Nusach of Ata Konanta, Ubodek Atzmo Michotzei Tvil. He adds it to the piyut that when he's ready to do the mitzvah tefillah, first he has to check his body out to make sure that there's no chatzitz. Okay. So the Mishnah says, Pashat Yorad Vitoval. He's wearing bigdei chol, and that itself is a little bit of an issue because of something called Trumas Hadeshen, which is done in the middle of the night to midnight on the night of Yom Kippur, and that he has to wear bigdei kohen. So why is he wearing bigdei chol and now changing it to bigdei zav? Apparently, during those hours between Trumas Hadeshen and midnight and daybreak, he had a hesech hadas, and therefore he would probably have to change his begodim. But be that as it may, it says that Yorad Vitaval, and now we're up to the Tvila Rishona, the first Tvila of the 5. Now, the Gemara is going to clarify, we're not up to it yet on Daf Lamed Beis, that he goes down into the mikveh only once at this point. And even though the psukim indicate that he's tovel 5 times, Tosfos explains that we could have had a havamina that he should be tovel 5 times when he goes down for this first tefillah, and 1 time would not be sufficient. But we're going to derive from these psukim that every time he changes from one avoda to another avoda, from avodas chutz to avodas pnim, he has an obligation of tefillah, and every time he changes those begadim, or shall we say changes the avoda, he requires a tefillah. That change itself is mechayev a tefillah unto itself. In fact, there's a Tosefta in Masechet Mikvos that says Hatovel Pamayim b'mikvah hareizem meguna. He shouldn't do 2 tefillahs, but only 1 tefillah. So he's going to do 1 tefillah times 5. Now the Mishnah says Taval v'ola v'nistapeg. What's the significance of Taval v'ola? So there's a sheet of the Kesef Mishnah in Hilchas Avos Hatumos, Shetfila mitaheres rak b'aliyoso shel hatovel min hamikvah. At what moment in time is the tara of tvila effective? Not when he's in the water, but when he comes out of the water. Okay. Now, what does it mean, vinistapik? Vinistapik means he wraps himself around a beged, which is called an alontis. I guess in English you'd call it a towel, but a large towel. And this is called the beged shemistafkin bo gishiyotim mibeis hamerchos. So that's called mistafkim or nistapek. Okay, now why does the Mishnah feel compelled to tell us such great detail? Okay, Olo, we could understand if you're like the case of Mishnah, that's when the Torah is effectuated. But why vinistapek? I mean, take a towel and dry yourself. But what's the big deal? So apparently, svigas hamayim migufo, to dry the water that's on his body when he comes up from the mikvah, is very important. Otherwise, the Mishnah didn't have to mention it. So the Aruch HaShulchan writes that what the Mishnah is trying to tell us is that he's allowed to use a towel on Yom Kippur to dry the water off his body. And that's called a reshus, not a chova, but the chiddush is that he's allowed to do so. The Gemara at the end of Shabbos is bothered by the possibility of drying his body off with a towel, because when the towel becomes saturated with the water, it's very easy to come to schita, to squeeze out the water from the towel. And therefore, we prohibit drying yourself off with a towel. Again, if it's your hands, that's one thing, but if you're drying your entire body, a mashmal in our Mishnah says the Aruch HaShulchan that in the case of the Kohen Gadol, he's allowed to dry his body off with a towel, and that's not included in the Isur that normally applies of drying your body off with a towel. And he says, Kevan Shakoin Gadol, histaper b'chol erev Shabbos nimtza she'ein legabav chashash schita b'hem. I'm not exactly sure what he means here. All I can tell you is that he's saying that the Kohen Gadol, because he does this on a regular basis, every Shabbos, we're not afraid that it'll come to schita. No, it's counterintuitive, but he's saying that when you get used to doing something, you understand the restrictions that are involved. So if on a regular basis, every Shabbos, the Kohen Gadol would dry off his body after he went into the mikveh, then we're not choshesh, we're not worried that he'll forget and start squeezing out the water from the beged. He's used to doing this in a very restricted way, a disciplined way on a regular basis. Okay, now with regard to this concept of drying his body with a towel when he comes up from the mikveh, we have no less than, how many is it? 5 or 6? I forgot. We have 5 shitas. We'll start with the Aruch HaShulchan. Again, the Aruch HaShulchan says that there's no need from the perspective of the avoda to dry his body off, but the heter is that he's allowed to. That's the chiddush of our Mishnah. On the other side of the equation, we have 4 different shitos, all of which who explain that Sipug, to dry his body, is ma'akev, meaning he's going to have to go down to the mikvah a second time around if he didn't dry himself off with a towel. And this is all these four shitas are coming to explain a diuk in the Rambam. In Hilchas Avodas Yom Kippurim, the Rambam says v'tovel v'ola umistapeg, and they interpret it as meaning that he must be mistapeg. It's not just the way the Aruch HaShulchan says, a reshus that will allow him to do so, but it's a requirement. Why? Why require that the Kohen Gadol dry himself off? Anybody have a guess? Because I myself was able to guess one of the four different shitos, four different explanations. Okay. No response. Number one, sipug hu midin chatzitza. What we're afraid is that maybe as a result of the tefillah, something got attached to his body. Maybe afrorios, right? The mechitza had a, either a wood, like a natural kind of a flaw to it. Maybe something came up and got attached to his body. And Kohen she'avad im chatzitza bein b'sar lebgadav, if there's a chatzitza now between his body and the begadim, is avodaso psula. Not only that, the Mishnah Melech suggests that the water itself might be a chatzitza between his body and the big kahuna. So that's the first approach. Second approach, sipug midin shmiras kvod bigdei kahuna. It's not halacha in the avoda to avoid chatzitza. It's halacha in kvod bigdei kahuna. The bigdei kahuna, as kleishars, have to be carefully and meticulously handled, and may mikvah Yecholim l'slach also. Maybe the Mei Mikvah would get them dirty. Has to make sure that he dries up the Mei Mikvah. O mipnei shemitzvahi sheyia begodim chadashim. That the halacha is that the begodim have to be have to be crispy and clean, as if they were brand new. And once they get wet, the water starts causing almost like a disintegration of the big kahuna. So it's no longer like new begodim. He adds here to this approach that the Meshech Chochmah holds that big day lavan, in a case of white garments, amayim mesirim mehalevoninus. I don't understand exactly the physics of it, why the water should reduce or diminish the whiteness of the beggar. Furthermore, im lo yistapek areu nena mi bigdei kahuna kemi shebisaro mistapek behem. He's not allowed to get any benefits from bigdei kahuna, and if they are serving now to dry his body, if he hadn't dried it with a towel, then he's violating the iser hana mi bigdei kahuna. Now, this issue about whether you're allowed to benefit from the big day kahuna is a gigantic issue in the Rishonim, the Rambam, the Ravid, and others. But we're going now according to the Shita that says you're not allowed to benefit, the Kohen is not allowed to benefit from the big day kahuna. Number 3, sipug siyum mitzvahs hatfila mipnei shehu bichlal chelik mitaras hatfila. Unbelievable. We assume that Tara is a result of Tvila. Now we're saying no. It's Tvila plus Sfiga, plus drying it out. The drying itself is part of the Tvila and generates or clinches the process of Tahara. Again, there's a lot to talk about here. I'm not such a bucky, but I know that the Sfiga sort of in a sense, is a clarification, it's testimony, so to speak, that he was down in the mikvah because you see him drying himself up. And that becomes part of the process of Tara. And number 4, that the reason we need sfiga of the mayim is because of inui. Now, I don't know, it sounds to me like he's assuming that it's a very hot day. And the water, in a sense, cools off his body. I mean, you and I would have said perhaps the exact opposite intuitively. You know, he wants to get the water off his body. That's why we always dry ourselves. But perhaps under certain situations, dafka the water, like for example, one of the various categories of inui on Yom Kippur is rechitza, meaning that when the body is wet, that's considered pleasurable. And there's a mitzvah on Yom Kippur of inui, of affliction, so he has to dry himself up, not because of the avoda, not because of the tahara, but simply because of the mitzvah of inui. That's a pretty radical approach. Okay. What are we up to now? He's gone to the mikveh and he's dried himself. A viulo big day za. Now he's ready to wear the 8 begadim and begin the process of hakrova avodas korban tamid shel shachar, which is an avoda that takes place the whole year round. It's not unique to Yom Kippurim, and therefore it requires big day zah. V'lavash v'kidesh yadav v'raglav. Now he has to go to the kiyar, and there he has to put his hands and his feet into the kiyar, and that's called kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. This is the first kiddush. There's going to be another 9 of them. Now, what are the 8 begadim that the totality of which, that unit of which, is called Big Day Zav? So let's first talk about the 4 begadim of a Kohen Hedjot, which are Big Day Lavan. That's Ksones, Michnasayim, Mitznefes, and Avnei. And all of these are made of material, not of gold, no gold. Then the Kohen Gadol adds the whole year round, and also on Yom Kippur for certain avodos, 4 additional begadim that are big day zav. They all have gold in them. And what are they? The choshen, the ephod, the me'il, and the tzitz. The choshen and the ephod were shizurim bechutei zav. They had actually golden threads, which they wove together. The me'il, right? This is one of the 4 begadim that the Kohen Gadol wears. Hayu pa'amonei zahav. There were golden bells on the bottom and the 4 corners of the me'il. Hatzitz, kulo asu mizav. It was pure gold. But again, the other 4 begadim, which are common to both Kohen Gadol and a Kohen Hedjot, they were the 4 begadim that we mentioned earlier, the Ksonis, Mithnasayim, Mitznefes, and Avnei, and they did not have gold. The Rambam seems to indicate that the phrase Big Day Zav really relates or includes within it all Shmona Begadim, even though only 4 out of the 8 are technically Big Day Zav. Now the Mishnah says, "Hey, vilo Big Day Zav." Ramban says, and against Tosfos, that, as we mentioned earlier, there's a Trumas Hadeshin on the night of Yom Kippur, and Tosfos says that avodah was done by the Kohen Gadol. And the Ramban argues that if Tosfos is right, then he's already wearing his Bigdei Zav from Chatzos Halayla, from midnight. There's no need to bring him his Bigdei Zav for him to don them if he had to, in fact, don them at midnight for the avodah of the Trumas Hadeshin. I don't know if you heard of Rav Yosef Shalom Elyashiv. He died not long ago, and he was a great posek, and he wrote commentaries on Masechet Yoma. And to my knowledge, that's the most popular of all his writings on Masechtas. Mistaber lo meshachrei Trumas Hadeshin chazar hakohen gadol lishkasa upashad es bigdei hakahuna. Rav Elyashiv wants to claim, in defense of Tosfos, that Enoch Hinami, he did wear the Bigdei Zav for the Trumas Hadeshin, but when he returned back to his lishka, the Avtinus lishka, then Pashat Bigdei Kahuna. He took off his Bigdei Kahuna. Now, why is that so? Kevan shesiach daito me'avoda ad alos hashachar. He puts the avoda out of his mind because right now it's midnight. It'll be 5-6 hours until alos hashachar. Is therefore his tefillah for the purpose of Trumas Hadeshin is not going to be effective for the shechita of the tamid. And that's called Hesek Hadas. Okay, so he now needs another tefillah shniya, after daybreak. L'chein evilo bigdei kahuna el beis haTefillah. Again, it's the same exact begadim that he wore at midnight, according to Tosfos, for the Trumas Hadeshin, but he had to take off those begadim and put them on again because he needs a tefillah. And why does he need a tefillah? Because of Hesek Hadas. He was Mesiach Das from the avoda, which is going to take place only with alos hashachar. So now, during the course of the nighttime, there's no avoda. He did the Trumas Hadeshin with his Bigdei Zav. Now there's no longer avoda. So in that state where there's no chiyuv avoda, there's a hesek hadas, and that generates a chiyuv tefillah. Once he needs a new tefillah, the tefillah of our Mishnah, then memela he takes off his begadim and he brings them back. So that's hevilo begada. So therefore, the objection of the Ramban against Tosfos, how could it be, according to you, that he already wore the Bigdei Zav at the moment of Trumas Hadeshin, and now it says in the Mishnah Heviu that they brought him the Bigdei Zav? The answer is he needs to put on Bigdei Zav because he needs another tefillah, and it was Hesek Hadas from the original tefillah for the Trumas Hadeshin to the tefillah for the sake of the Avodas HaTamid. And now we're ready for the Avodas HaTamid. He had already his first tefillah. He did his Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Now again, keep in mind that the tefillah is before he puts on the Bigdei Zav. After the tefillah is ended with the sfiga, then he wears, they bring him the Bigdei Zav, and now he's ready for Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. That's after Levish. Now, Hevilo es hatamid. Now we're ready for the Tamid Shel Shachar. And this part of the Mishnah is going to kick off the Seder Havoda of the Kohen Gadol of Yom Kippurim. They bring him the Korban Tamid. The Korban Tamid is a tleh, a lamb. Now, what we have to understand is during the course of the year, the Tamid Shel Shachar was was the avoda was done by the Kohen who won the pious, whoever won the lottery. And there were two Kohanim, one would do the Shechita and the other would do the Kabbalah Saddam. Obviously, if you're involved in Shechita, you don't have the wherewithal of picking up a receptacle and accepting the dam that's coming out of the Tzavra Behema. We need two different Kohanim for that. But on Yom Kippur, we have a rule that Kol Avodos Eino Ksheres Ela Bo. All the avodos of Yom Kippurim have to be implemented by him, by the Kohen Gadol, I mean. Now, how could the Kohen Gadol do both Shechita and Kabbalah Saddam? It's humanly impossible. And yet, both are avodos. So the Mishnah says, Krotzo umerak acher Shechita al yoda. Emphasize the tsere under the ches, acher. Acher means another Kohen. So what's going to be is that the Kohen Gadol does the shechita, but he doesn't complete the shechita. He only does that which is absolutely necessary. It's called shechita shnei simonim, and then the Kohen Hedjot, the other Kohen, is going to finish the shechita, and at that moment the Kohen Gadol himself is free to receive the dam in the mizrah. And that's called umerek acher shchita al yoda. Al yoda means bishvilo. So the word umerek means v'gamar. V'gamar means the last process that complete, the last segment that completes a process. And here's a case where the shechita was done with two simonim, rove two simonim. The Kohen Gadol only did most of the two simonim. The last part of the two simonim was shechted by acher, by a different Kohen. And that's fine, because when we say kol avodos einam ksheres ela bo, that we need a Kohen Gadol for all the avoda of the shechita completes itself after rove shnayim, when he severs the majority of the kana, which is the windpipe, and the veshet, which is the esophagus. And now what happens is that since the shechita is still going on, but in this case, the end of the shechita, the gamar or the merak, is being done by another Kohen, this frees the Kohen Gadol to immediately pick up the kli, the mizrach, and receive the dam in the kli. This magical possibility that the Kohen Gadol himself will be doing both shechita and Kabbalah Saddam is made possible by virtue of the fact that there's another Kohen who's going to complete the shechita. Now, tomorrow, what I'd like to discuss is it absolutely necessary to complete the shechita, or is rov shnayim enough? And if rov shnayim is enough, why do we bother with the acher to complete the shechita? L'marek es hashchita. And number two, if it's an absolute requirement, l'marek es hashchita, it's not enough to have rov shnayim, so then l'chora we should require Kohen Gadol to complete the shechita. So that's something that we'll get into Amir Hashem tomorrow. Let me add just a few points over here. Number one, what about this Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim? Did it take place before he took off his garments or after he took off his garments? This is going to be a machlokas later on between Rabbi Meir and Chachamim. According to one shita, Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim requires pshitas bigdei kahuna, is lifnei pshita. According to the other manyom, it's after the pshita. Now, that's with regard to pshitas bigdei kahuna, but Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim for levichas bigdei kahuna, right? There are two different Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. One is for removing his clothes, and the other is for putting on his new clothes. As far as putting on his new change of clothes, everybody agrees, there's no machlokas, that he needs Kiddush Yadayim after Levisha, after he puts on the clothes. If you're talking about Pshita, taking off his clothes, then we're going to have a machlokas whether the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim takes place before the Pshita or after the Pshita. Now, we mentioned before that there are 10, that was on Daf Yutes, there are 10 Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim. They're all from the Kiyar. And that's Rashi back on Daf Yutes. Koshal Pirusha. The Gemara says later on at Daf Mem Gimel that Mishum Kvodah Shel Kohen Gadol Lo Hayam Mekadosh Yodav Raglo Ben Akiyar El Min Hamayim Sheivio Lo Bekiton Shel Zav. In honor of the Kohen Gadol, instead of doing the Kiddush Yadayim like any other Kohen in the Kiyar, they brought him a receptacle that was made of gold that had water in it. That's where he did his Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. And yet Rashi says that all 10 Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim in the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur was from the Kiyar. So the Piskei Harid tries to reconcile this Rashi. He says, Shebechol HaKiddushim milu es hakiton shel zav b'mayim min hakiyar ubahem kidesh Kohen Gadol yodav v'ragla. That in effect, although the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim was done from the Kiton Shel Zav, but the water itself, that's what Rashi is referring to, came from the Kiyar. So they put the Kiton Shel Zav and they dunked it into the Kiyar to remove the mayim from the Kiyar. However, there's another way of understanding Rashi, that's the Siach Yitzchak. And he says that the Kiddush HaRishon of the Kohen Gadol is different than all the other Kiddush. The first Kiddush was from the Kiyar. And this he bases on a Yushalmi that Kohen Gadol Mekadosh Yodav Raglo B'Yom Kippurim Mikiton Shel Zav Chutz Mikiton HaRishon. So the Yushalmi is outspoken that the first Kiddush is from the Kiyar and not from the Kiton Shel Zav. And that's what Rashi has in mind when he says that the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim of the Kohen was from the Mei Kiyar. Ubir Shetaimo Shel Rashi Mipnei Shakida Sharishon Hu Lavodas Hatomid Ashaval Lavodas Hatomid Shebechol Yom the Im Yekadesh Yodav V'Raglo Ben Akiton Shel Zav Ol Hu Litos Velasos Kain B'Shar Yemos Hashana. He might be tempted mistakenly to use the Kiton Shel Zav for every single preparation for the Tamid Shel Shachar, because that's what he did on Yom Kippur. And he offers another pshat that Kiddush HaRishon who bedin kidin Kiddush Shel Kol Yemei Hashana shemitzvasa min hakiyur. Aval shar Kiddush Shel Yom Kippur nilma min hakosu v'rachatz v'lo never behen mitzvahs kiyur. So there's a special source in the Torah for the mitzvah of Kiddush Rishon. It's not derived from the word Varochatz, and therefore it has the same status as the Kiddush of the whole year round, which is mitzvasa min hakiyur. So let's make a note of where we got up to today. We're up to Kirtza, and we're talking, of course, about the avoda of the Kohen Gadol in the Tamid Shel Shach.